Welcome to Forum 13, post-World War I. We're going to take a look at British Jews, Zionism, and the mandate in Palestine during this complex intra-war period. Again, let's just hope for the best with respect to technological issues. So, the story of British Jewry is important in trying to understand the interwar years and the Zionist movement. There had been a Jewish community in England long before there was a UK during the High Middle Ages. And for a while it really flourished, but came to a very quick end in the year 1290. They were expelled. It was the first major expulsion in Europe, and then that pattern swept across the continent. The English also contributed such lovely things as a blood libel to Jewish history and other expressions of anti-Semitism. England was officially Judenrein then from 1290 to the middle of the 17th century, when Oliver Cromwell, who had deposed the monarchy, decided not to renew the order of expulsion, thereby, by default, permitting the Jews to come back into England. So from the middle of the 17th century forward into the period we're looking at today, immediately after World War I, England has a Jewish community, an active Jewish community, which by World War I will grow to over 300,000 strong, and are particularly important for a variety of reasons, including the fact that they help reframe Judaism in the English language, and I would say in the early 19th century have a tremendous impact on the formation of Judaism in America, and then subsequently, as being the home Jewry in the British Empire, play a great role globally in spreading an Anglophone kind of Judaism, and in terms of the development of the Zionist Center inside the British Mandate in Palestine. Jews were readmitted in the 17th century, but it's not really until the 18th century that you begin to get argumentation in favor of a full readmission of Jews from a political enfranchisement point of view. Such individuals as John Toland and the better-known John Locke will all argue that Jews can become citizens of the realm and are educable people. For their part, the supporters of Locke and Toland do manage to bring a naturalization bill to Parliament. Naturalization, in the context of the 17th and 18th century, has to do with economic rights more than it has to do with political rights, and that actually becomes characteristic of British Jewry, that for a long time they seek to secure economic rights. It's unlike here in the States, where political rights were just as important, or perhaps even superior, to economic rights. So they shy away from it until the really 1830s, and thereafter there is a successful push for political enfranchisement, led in part by the House of Rothschild and the nascent reform movement in England, although many English Jews said, why are we knocking on this door? It would be better simply to live, let live, earn a fair living, and just leave it at that. Jewish influence does grow under the protection of Benjamin Disraeli, who has to convert in order to serve the Queen, Victoria, as a prime minister, but nevertheless remains proud of his Jewish background and advocates. There are lots of wonderful stories about people like Disraeli and Churchill and the rest of that gang. My favorite one in this regard or favorite too, about Disraeli, to give it some flavor, is when asked once by a rather snooty aristocrat who his ancestors were, he simply replied, "I am an ancestor." And at another time, upon sitting down at a state banquet, he he was approached by a British aristocrat who said that he had just returned, the aristocrat had just returned from Japan, and wanted to report to Disraeli that in Japan there were neither Jews nor pigs, to which Disraeli replied, then you and I shall go there together, and there will be one of each. So you can get a sense of his saltiness as a person. The English had trouble absorbing their Jews, and that was made worse after 1880 as Russian Jews start pouring into England. In 1905, a cap is put on English Jewish population by Lord Balfour, who later issues the statement about a Jewish homeland in British Palestine. The Brits were most concerned with Palestine because of the Suez Canal and its linkage between the Mediterranean and the Indian Ocean, the jewel, India being the jewel of the British Empire, as well as imperial interests in being the controllers, the latter-day Crusaders, so to speak, of the Holy Land. The anti-Semitism, by the way, in Britain persists, and if you ever have a chance to watch the movie Chariots of Fire about the 1924 Olympics, you can get a good sense of how anti-Semitism worked in England during this time, and how a certain rising element in British Jewry fought back against it. With World War I, the English have their opportunity to take control of the land of Israel, sending their armies up from Egypt. In 1917, they defeat the Ottomans. The League of Nations cede control of what would become British Palestine to them. The French get Syria and Lebanon. The English get Iraq, and on it goes. The colonial powers of Europe just carve up the map. Initially, British Palestine was both sides of the Jordan, both the West Bank and the East Bank. But in 22, the Foreign Secretary, one Winston Churchill, cedes the East Bank, which becomes the country or monarchy of Transjordan today. Jordan as part of a grander plan of uniting the Arabs under several monarchies. At the time when the British take over Palestine, it's important to note that the population was just above 750,000, of which about 80,000 were Jews. That is a little more than 10%. Those statistics will change considerably during the next 30 years, which will precipitate a great change in British policy. It's also interesting to note that the governor of the Mandate was a British Jew by the name of Sir Lord Herbert Samuel. As soon as the war is over and the British take control, we see the first run of Arab riots in the British Mandate already in the year 1920. And this will prompt the development of a more permanent Jewish security force, which ultimately becomes the Haganah, which ultimately becomes the Israeli army. It's also during this period where the main source of immigration will shift from what had been Tsarist Russia to the now independent country of Poland, and we see considerable growth from the 80,000 or so that were there at the beginning of the Mandate to a much larger population, which we'll talk about at the time of independence. And a lot of them come from Poland. This is the period where Tel Aviv begins to grow. It's mostly the Central Corridor and up toward the Jezreel, where you see most of the Jewish settlement. The dynamics of the whole world, including the Jewish world and the world of Palestine and the world of British Jewry, changes, obviously, with Hitler's rise to power in 1933. Things simply become terribly unsettled. In 1936, there's the largest wave of Arab riots. There had been another set in 29, which actually gave rise to the Irgun, which also fought against the British, unlike the Haganah. And then in 39, the British offered the White Paper as a way of appeasing the Palestinian Arabs and their supporters in the Arab world to limit Jewish immigration. The Jewish population was now a third of everybody in Palestine, so there were about 500,000 Jews out of a population of 1.5 million, with a real possibility of a Jewish majority. The fact of the matter is the British cut it right there, or it would have kept growing, and there was not enough Jewish power in England to reverse that. The Brits were concerned that the Arabs would go over to the Nazis. Remember, the Turks had been aligned with the Ottoman, and in fact what they got was a split Jewry, with some of the Arabs supporting the English, for example in Jordan, and others, as in the Mufti of Jerusalem, supporting the Nazi side to protect their own national interests, plus their own deep hatred of the Jewish community in their midst. In the United States, during this period, what we saw was approximately 250,000 American Jews served in the American Armed Forces, and it advanced their Americanization, but not to the same extent that we see after World War II. With then the cutting off of American immigration, about 15 years after what happened in England, this very large American Jewish community becomes increasingly isolated from Europe and from British Palestine. Russia was now sealed off. The only major source of immigration would be from Poland, and those Jews had a tough time getting into the United States. Furthermore, in terms of the politics of the Zionist movement during this period, one of the leading Jews of America during the day did attempt to become the undisputed leader of the World Zionist movement, and that was the Associate Justice of the Supreme Court, Louis Brandeis, but he was not able to take control, and instead that went to Chaim Weizmann, who was an East European Jew who was working within the British context, and it was Weizmann who had successfully negotiated the Balfour Declaration in 1917, and continues to serve as kind of the foreign minister of the Zionist movement. On the ground, inside the land of Israel, a quasi-governmental organization had developed starting in 1929, known as the Sachnut, also called the Jewish Agency, in charge of immigration, education, and things like that. It was the nascent government of the pre-state of Israel, and with the state coming into being in May of 1948, the Sachnut retains its control over immigration, absorption, to some extent education, but the government becomes its own entity. The Sachnut is heavily dominated by the labor faction. There is a socialist and a communist faction, a loose alliance. Communists remarkably remain close to Stalin throughout this period, much less so with the socialist group. The socialist group, of course, was headed by the labor leader David Ben-Gurion, who was going to go on to become the first prime minister of the state of Israel and one of the great figures in all of modern Jewish history. So we see in the interwar period some realignments in the Jewish world. The Zionist movement shifts to inside of the British Empire, and the other main players for different reasons, the Jewish community in Russia, the Jewish community in the United States, are not as central to the process. In the meanwhile, the center of the Zionist experiment is growing inside the land of Israel in preparation for statehood, which during the course of World War II and the Shoah becomes the immediate goal of the Zionist movement, and that will, of course, help shape the dynamics of rescue and political prioritization. Next week, in the final teaching week of the semester, but not the final week of the class, we'll turn our attention to specifically the situation inside of Germany, where so much of modern Jewish history was shaped with respect to the politics of emancipation and the development of the different streams of modern Judaism, and we will see how they fare during the intra-war period. And then in the final week of the class, we'll turn again to your own presentations on the different papers that you have been working on. So I hope this message does get to you in a timely fashion. I am recording it on Sunday, April the 14th, and will do what I can to get it into your hands. Thank you.